Welcome to an evening of learning celebrating the 80th anniversary of the Chanukas Habayis, the official dedication of 770. Same time, same place. Tonight's learning is dedicated l'schus Shalom Dei Ber Ben Miriam Bluma for a refuah shlema ukreva, a complete and speedy recovery. We ask of each and every one of you to please be meisiv, even just in Torah, Tefillah, and Tzedakah. L'schus Shalom Dei Ber Ben Miriam Bluma. Don't underestimate your actions, and may we share in B'suras Tevis. I would like to personally dedicate tonight's learning. Tonight's program is made possible by the generous funding of Reb Yossi and Mrs. Katz, Reb Shloimi and Mrs. Greenwald, Reb Zalman and Mrs. Wyshetsky, Reb Yerachmiel and Mrs. Jacobson, Reb Nussi and Mrs. Sternberg, Reb Yossi and Mrs. Sofer. A very special thank you to Hatamim Shapsi Sofer for all your help and coordination on this project. Thank you to Reb Elkanah Shmutkin and his entire GEM staff for providing materials for tonight's program. After tonight's program, be sure to visit beisrabenu.com and fill out your name and mother's name on the B'suras Tevis form, which will be brought and read at the Rebbe's Ohel. May we always have B'suras Tevis to report. As we are about to begin, you may download this study companion at beisrabenu.com. Let's begin tonight's program. It was Tuesday, Chof-Alef Elul, Tov-Shin, in the year 1940, at 6 p.m., the 6th Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, came down this very elevator and went through the door, down the hallway, and into the shul for the Chanukas Habayis, the official dedication of 770.
Exactly 80 years ago, on this day, in this moment, the 21st of Elul, in the year Tov-Shin, 1940, at 6 p.m., the 6th Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, known as the Rebbe Rayatz, entered this very room for Chanukas Habayis, the dedication of one of the most famous buildings in the world called 770 Eastern Parkway. A day that would change the world forever. You see, in this material world, time and space are transient, they're temporary, impermanent. However, the Torah, Judaism teaches us that we can take a moment and immortalize it. We can take a space and eternalize it. And that's exactly what happened 80 years ago. So though it's 80 years ago, it lives on forever. Taking a building, turning it into a Mikdash Ma'at, a sanctuary in microcosm, sanctifying the space by turning it into a Beis HaKnesses, a Beis HaMedrash, a shul, a Torah study hall, and also the personal home of the 6th Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Rebbe Rayatz and his family. And the space itself, this very space where we are right now, is saturated with the tears, with the blood and sweat of the thousands of prayers that the Rebbe said and cried in this room during Shabbos, holidays, daily prayer services, the Farbrengens he led. So as we sit here 80 days later, 80 years later. We are not experiencing a past, we're experiencing an eternity. The Rebbe Rayatz, Friedrich Rebbe, when he was a child, 5, 6 years old, he tells a story. Actually, in the first discourse, Hasidic discourse that he delivered 100 years ago, in the year Tafresh Pei, in the year 1920, he says he was a little child in the room where his father, the Rebbe Rashab, the 5th Chabad Rebbe, entered. And he was dressed, the Rebbe Friedrich Rebbe says that the Rebbe Rashab was dressed in his garb as he was coming to see his father, the 4th Chabad Rebbe, the Rebbe Marash. And the little boy, who would become the 6th Lubavitcher Rebbe, says he sees his father whispering, saying a prayer, and tears dripping from his eyes, as exactly as it was when his father, the Rebbe Marash, was alive. And he explains, because the holiness of a tzaddik's work does not ever end. It permeates and impacts the very table, the chairs, the space. And indeed, this room, which was called the Zal HaKotten, the small shul, became that permanent environment of learning and of davening. Just a little more than 10 years later, 1951, the 7th Lubavitcher Rebbe, the son-in-law of the Rebbe Rayatz, this is exactly where he accepted, formally and officially, the leadership. This is when he said the famous Bosiligani, announcing and declaring that the mission of this generation, is the 7th generation, is to bring the Shechina below, v'shachanti b'seichem, to bring Mashiach and the Geula. How many beautiful prayers, study, good deeds were accomplished in a room like this. I personally remember the most awesome day for us as Bochrim, as students in the yeshiva. Erev Yom Kippur, right before Kol Nidre, the Rebbe would walk into this room dressed in his talis, his kittel, glowing with that purity, Yom Kippur purity, and with tears bless his children, his students, year after year. It was the most special moment. The very walls were sweating. It was beyond awesome. So all this comes together when we recreate and we relive exactly what happened 80 years ago now. It was the beginning of a new era. And indeed, from this room, 770 Eastern Parkway, it expanded and continued to expand. The Rebbe inspiring his students to become shluchim, emissaries, inspired in this very place to go to the farthest outskirts of the universe and bring Yiddishkeit. All from this building, from this structure. So when we think of 80 years ago, on the day of the 21st of Elul, it's not just a day, it's a day that is forever etched into eternity. We're celebrating and honoring the eternity of what Judaism represents. Torah Nitzchis, Chassidus, with the objective, as the Rebbe said, to transform this world into a home for God. So this home, called 770, and as the Rebbe emphasized, 770 is the gematria, the equivalent of faratzta, the blessing God gave Jacob, Yaakov, ufaratzta yamav akedma v'tzafein v'negba, that you will spread out to the east and to the west and to the north and south. Faratzta is 770. Faratzta captures the very essence of not just remaining in your own little corner box, but to spread out, both quantitatively and qualitatively, to reach everyone and everywhere with the Word of God. In 1952, because of the growing people coming to see the Rebbe, the holidays was impossible for everybody to fit into this room. So they suggested to the Rebbe that maybe we rent a hall for the holidays, for Rosh Hashanah, for Yom Kippur, for the other holidays. And the Rebbe responded. He said, 10 years my father-in-law, the sixth Lubavitcher Rebbe, cried to the point that it soaked the walls with his tears, his prayers, his teachings, his studies. And you want me to leave this place? I cannot do that. A number of years later, President Shazar, Shneur Zalman Rubashov, came to visit the Rebbe. And it was controversial, to be honest. He was the president of Israel. And there were politicians that didn't feel that it's appropriate that he's coming to see the Rebbe. If anything, the Rebbe should come see him. And there was a debate going on behind the scenes. He wanted to come, but there was a lot of pressure for him not to come. He actually asked his friend Chaim Grade, famous Yiddish author, what should he do? And Chaim Grade said something interesting. He said, think long term. If you don't go, how are you going to feel? You're going to regret it. If you do go, you may have momentary pain and pressure, but long term you'll never regret it. Well, he ended up coming to the Rebbe. The Rebbe, of course, when asked, said he insisted that he come. When he arrived, the Rebbe showed him around exactly where we are right now, these rooms. And then when they sat down in the Rebbe's room, the Rebbe said to him, you see these walls, you see this space. This is filled with the tears and the sweat of Yidden. This is a place that helped Jews from Russia be released. This I could not bring to you in your hotel in Manhattan. These indicate, these incidents and episodes, these episodes indicate that a building is not just a building. Once it becomes saturated, once it becomes impacted by spirituality, by virtue, once it becomes a house, what we call a Beis HaKnesses and Beis HaMedrash, like a Migdash, a Beis HaMikdash, a holy place, a Beis Torah Aveda V'Gemilas Chasodim, a house of Torah, a house of prayer, and a house of good deeds. That cannot be transferred because it permeates the very essence of this space. So let us go back 80 years ago as the Frierdiker Rebbe, the sixth Lubavitcher Rebbe, enters this room. And it was awesome, based on eyewitnesses. He sat down at the table. It was set up in a festive way. This was the Chanukas Habayis, the dedication of 770. The Frierdiker Rebbe said L'chaim. He told the Chassidim to say L'chaim. He shared some words. And then, of course, the highlight was a discourse, a Chassidic discourse. Precisely on this Maimer Chazal, on this Mishnah and Pirkei Avos, Al Shleisha Dvarim Ha'olam Omed. On three things the world stands: Al Torah, Al Veda, Al Gemilas Chasodim. On Torah, study; on prayer, service of the heart; and on good deeds, Gemilas Chasodim. We will be learning this Maimer, exactly as it was said right here 80 years ago. But a little background. How'd they get to this place? How 770 came to be? It's actually quite dramatic. You have to remember this is 1940. 1940, the hells of Europe were burning and decimating our brothers and sisters. The Frierdiker Rebbe, the Rebbe Rayatz, barely made it out from Poland on a last boat through Stockholm, arrived in the United States of America on the 9th day of the second Adar, the 9th day of the second Adar, Tes Adar Sheni, and he came with nothing except his family. He had to leave everything there. Many of his family members, his chassidim, his students. You could imagine what a Rebbe was going through, traveling over that ocean, knowing what is happening to his children, to his brothers and sisters, to his brethren. Frierdiker Rebbe came to America in New York, and the Chassidim put him up in the Greystone Hotel, which everyone knew was a temporary residence. And that's where he spent several months. Pesach, he actually went to Lakewood, New Jersey. One of the friends of Chabad gave the Rebbe a beautiful home. As a matter of fact, it was a consideration by some that the Rebbe should stay in Lakewood. Maybe Lakewood is a perfect place to establish the central headquarters of Lubavitch. The Frierdiker Rebbe, absolutely not. He said, I want to be among my people. Lakewood was more of a vacation spot. And it became clear he wanted to be in the center, in the hub of New York. New York, the largest population of the Jewish people at the time. So based on that insistence, the Chassidim, friends, supporters began to look for a place to become the new headquarters. You have to remember, Lubavitch, the name Lubavitch comes from a town called Lubavitch. 103 years, Lubavitch had its permanent home in a small town in White Russia until World War I, when they had to leave. So now we were looking for a new Lubavitch, a new center. Finally, 770 became an option. Also interesting twist. It was built in 1933 as a clinic. And they got themselves into legal trouble. So it became a perfect opportunity. They actually bought the building for $30,000, which is a lot more than $30,000 today, but still quite a bargain, with $10,000 down payment. $30,000, and it was perfect because it had all the needs of the Rebbe. It served as his personal home, home for his oldest daughter and son-in-law, the base for the yeshiva Tomchei Mimim, the central yeshiva academy, offices, a synagogue, and many other functions. A 3-story building. And they bought it for the $30,000, $10,000 down payment. As an aside, the community here was a very affluent one. Many Jews, many powerful, influential Jews, who actually were not that pleased when they heard the news that Lubavitch was about to buy this building. And they had meetings to try to find ways to prevent it. At one of the meetings, a Jew stood up and said, the chutzpah, the nerve, a man who gave his life in Russia and then in Europe to save Jewish lives and barely made it here? That's what we're going to do to him? Not let him find a home? And that essentially eliminated all these naysayers. So indeed, the contracts were signed. On the 12th day of that year, 1940, 770 Eastern Parkway was bought by Lubavitch. The keys were given to the Rebbe Rayatz. A little while later, a little month later, on the 19th of Elul, the Rebbe moved in with his family. And we actually have the words that he said when he entered. In a talk on that was a Sunday, the 19th of Elul, it says when the Rebbe entered for the first time, 770, this is a Rebbe. Remember, when a Rebbe speaks, his first words in 770 ever uttered. There'd be millions of words uttered by the Frierdiker Rebbe and then by the Rebbe. What were the first words when he entered into 770? He said, Yehi Ratzon, may it be God's will, as the tefillas zon sein mit haprimius, that the prayers should be internal. Und soll sich davenen mit dem emes aveda primius dicken Geschmack. And should pray with a true, dedicated, and internalized Geschmack. Joy, pleasure, very hard word to actually translate. Geschmack. A little more than 10 years later, when the mortgage was paid up on 770, the Rebbe actually referred to the words of his father-in-law, and he asked a question. He said, 770 was bought as a home for the Rebbe. Why is his emphasis on prayer? And the Rebbe answered, and we have this in his own handwriting. He says, it's a bayis kloli for Klal Yisrael. It's a central home for all Jews. The neshama klolis, the central soul, referring to the Rebbe Rayatz, was hat dort sich hereingeklieben. This is where he moved in. Hat sich misase given lechaber. He was immersed in connecting, and the Rebbe says prayer comes from the word connecting. All Jews lavim shebashamayim, to their Father in heaven. And that's why that was the first words that the Rebbe uttered when he entered 770 on the 19th of Elul. 2 days later, on Tuesday, scheduled the Chanukas Habayis, the dedication of this new building. Invitations were actually sent out before Shabbos. The great simcha and joy, why witnesses tell us, was palpable, tremendous. Because now everyone felt and understood that a new stage of the work of the Rebbe, the work of Chabad, that began 6 generations earlier with the Alter Rebbe, Rab Shneur Zalman, and 2 generations before that, the Baal Shem Tov, now would begin a new stage, a new era. In retrospect, when we look back 80 years, we see absolutely. Look what the Rebbe accomplished, and then what his son-in-law, our Rebbe, Der Ashvi, 7th generation, accomplished. So now let's go to the 21st of Elul, Tuesday. 6 p.m. The 6th Lubavitcher Rebbe, who lived on the 2nd floor of his building, came down with the elevator, entered through the hall and the center door. They created a makeshift platform for him, which would later become the place that he would say Maimorim, discourses, he would speak, and later his Mamala Mokim. The 7th generation, our Rebbe, would fabring as well in this place, sat down there, the Chassidim around, there was L'chaim, there was some mezainis cake. The Rebbe started saying L'chaim to people, and indicated and directed them to say L'chaim. And then he began to speak. The different diaries that we have describe some of what he said, and we actually have it printed as well. After he spoke, another song was sung, a few songs were sung, and then came the highlight. Chassidic Maimer was always the highlight, because this is the Rebbe speaking Chassidus. As described by eyewitnesses, the Rebbe took his handkerchief. He actually described even the color. A golden red handkerchief of European origins. He wrapped it around his hand, which is the custom what the Rebbes did when they said a Maimer. It was a way of grounding the divine intensity that they were about to reveal. And he began the Maimer, Al Shleisha Dvarim Ha'elam Maimed. We're going to learn this Maimer together. As I said, this isn't a Maimer of 80 years ago. It's a Maimer now that lives on. Its message is relevant today more than ever. And the lessons that we derive from it, practical lessons, is the ultimate goal of why we honor this day. It's not just about historical commemoration. It's about rededicating ourselves to this room, to this building, but to the spirit of it. the Teira Aveda Gemilas Chasodim that flow and continue to flow from this building to the entire world. Faratzta, 770. A short introduction to this Maimer said on the 21st of Elul, Tafshin, 1940. When a Rebbe says a Maimer, it's just not a speech. It's not just a lecture. It's actually a divine revelation. And it's a divine revelation relevant to the time in which he's saying it. So when the 6th Lubavitcher Rebbe said this discourse, the whole crowd was standing. He had his handkerchief tied around his arm. He was delivering the essence of what a Chanukas Habayis of 770 is about. The dedication of this new shul, this new Beis Medrash, this new home for Lubavitch headquarters until Mashiach would come. So the name of the Maimer itself, Al Shleisha Dvarim Ha'elim Emet, Al HaTeira, Al HaVeda, Al Gemilas Chasodim, the obvious connection. The entire world stands on these three pillars, Torah, prayer, and good deeds. That's what the essence of a Beis HaKnesses and Beis HaMedrash is about. It's a place of study, Torah, a place of prayer, Aveda, and a place of Gemilas Chasodim. That embodies the essence of what this building is all about. It's not a building just to eat meals and sleep. That's the technical part. It's a soul, it's a home for God. And indeed, many years later, when the Rebbe would speak about everyone building from their home a Teira, a Bayis Chabad, a Beis Chabad, a Bayis Teira, a Veda Gemilas Chasod. So that's the obvious connection. But it gets deeper than that. It goes deeper than that. Let's just put things into context. When the Rebbe says a Maimer, remember, this is the most important statement that can be made at that moment. What was going on the 21st of Elul in 1940? One of the worst periods in Jewish history, if not the worst. A third of our people would be decimated. And you can imagine that the Rebbe lived with that 24/7. You see it in his talks, you see it in his letters, you see it in his behavior. So there's no question that this Maimer is addressing that as well in the language of Chassidus. To strengthen the point, when we look at the talks he gave, both on the 19th of Elul and the 21st of Elul, let's just read together. The 19th of Elul, he says, "Mir leben jetzt über sehr schwere Zeit." We're right now experiencing a very difficult time when the life of a person is not worth anything, and especially the life of a Jew. And the Jews are in a very precarious situation. And all of us, every one of us, is worried. What will happen with our close ones? God forbid we cannot say that we are worthy of this torture. We have to pray to God that He should merit and everything should become better. Now you have to remember, the Rebbe Rayatz had some of his closest chassidim and family members in Europe who would unfortunately many go to the gas chambers. His own daughter, Shena, and her husband, Menachem Mendel Harnerstein. The Rebbe, his son-in-law, and his daughter, Chaimushka, were in the throes of Nazi Europe. Chassidim, secretaries, some would not make it. That's one reference. The second, on actually the 21st of Elul, the day of the Chanukas Habayis, the Rebbe says, "Der yitztike matzav in Welt is mu'uyam." The present situation of the world is, mu'uyam means awesomely terrible. Every individual is worried for what will happen to all of us. And especially Eden, who have to now think about not just themselves, but all the entire Jewish people. So there's no doubt that in the wake of these words, and then comes the Maimer, Ashleisha Dvarim Ha'elim Emet, that the Rebbe was addressing the worst chapter in Jewish history with a message of hope, a message of encouragement, a message of strength that would allow us to get through it and become stronger than ever. This is very clearly the undercurrent of the central theme of this mimer. There are 4 particular themes, and in this order, that the Rebbe Rayatz discusses in the mimer. The mimer consists of 3 chapters, and the first point is that the world is a state of concealment. Existence itself conceals its source, it conceals the divine, it conceals its purpose. And of course we know that the worst type of concealment is when you see what human beings can do to each other. The second point in the mimer, in the discourse, is that the concealment, however, is not an end in itself. It really is a stepping stone. It's a means to achieve greater revelation. A very fascinating theme. Point number 3 is God's unwavering and essential love to the Jewish people. That nothing that happens, their behavior, or any other thing, can sever that relationship. It's pure, complete, forever. And finally, point number 4 is that love empowers the Jewish people with the ability to see through the darkness, to see through the concealment, and actually transform it by removing all the concealments. That comes from the power of love and their connection, their essential connection with the divine. So now let us learn the mimer inside, exactly as the Friedrich Rebbe said it and then wrote it. The title of the mimer is Chanukas Habayis Chof-Alef Elul Shintov, which is the dedication of the shul on the 21st of El in the year 1940. Al shleish dvarim ha'elam emed, al ha'teira, al ha'aveda, v'al gmilas chasodim. The world stands on 3 pillars: on Torah, on service, which refers to prayer, and on gmilas chasodim, acts of kindness. Upirush Rabbeinu Nishmosei Eden, and the Alter Rebbe interprets this Al shleish dvarim ha'elam emed, al gimel dvarim ha'helam emed. He takes the word ha'elam, which means the world, he says, on 3 things, helam, the concealment stands. Why? Because the elam in yonei helam. Elam, the very word for world, means concealment. The tam hadover. And what's the reason for this? Why indeed is the world called concealment? He's going to explain, because the entire creation can only have happened through the concealment of divine energy. The creation of the world is through the concealment of divine light, divine energy. And he brings now a proof of this from the Eitz Chaim, which is a sefer from the Arizal. The holy Arizal, Rabbi Isaac Luria, his student, Rabbi Chaim Vital, wrote Eitz Chaim, a magnum opus. So what does it say in Eitz Chaim? Eitz Chaim, right in the beginning of Eitz Chaim, it says that Chilas HaKol, the beginning of everything. This doesn't mean actually beginning in time, it means conceptually. Beginning of all reality. What was the state of being in the beginning of it all? Was Eir Elyon Pashat, a supernal light, a supernal energy, seamless, shapeless, filled everything. The Rebbe explains in different places what means Kol HaMetzias. There was no Metzias, nothing existed yet. It means wherever existence would emerge, at this point, in this conceptual moment, the only thing that existed was divine consciousness. Nothing else. There was no duality, there was no other state, there was no other. A complete shapeless, seamless, divine energy filled everything. There was no room, there was no space for anything but the divine. So how do we explain existence in a way that we can understand it logically? Says the Eitz Chaim, says the Arizal, Va'achar kach silik eirei hagodol al atzad kavyochel. That afterwards, again, conceptually, the next stage is that God, so to speak, kavyochel, remove this divine energy to the side. This does not mean physically, it does not mean spatially, it means conceptually. V'nasa chol l'mokim poneh. And a hole and an empty space emerged. La'amidas ha'elamis. So now we have the space for the creation of existence of the world. This is the Tzimtzum Harishon, the famous Tzimtzum Harishon, that first concealment, that quantum leap where the divine concealed itself, the divine energy completely concealed. Shenitzamtzum Eid Sof HaBligvul. Eid Sof HaBligvul refers to an expansive, endless divine consciousness, and the Tzimtzum concealed it. But a second thing that Tzimtzum did, besides concealing the Eid HaBligvul, the infinite light, it also caused that Nizgala Keich HaGvul Shebein Seif, that was revealed, what emerged was the divine power to create the finite. Let me stop for a moment and explain this. The classic example for this is from the Alter Rebbe, of a teacher and a student, which we're actually going to use later in the Maimer, but let me preface it now because it helps understand the context. Think of a teacher who's brilliant, infinitely more brilliant than any of his students. If you walk into his room, into his presence, he's busy learning and studying. And if he were just to continue teaching and studying, nobody would understand a word he's saying. It would be completely overwhelming. Nobody's on that level. So how does this great, brilliant scholar become a teacher? He has to be mitzamtzim. He has to conceal his brilliance. He has to not allow himself to be speaking and explaining, so he falls silent. Now a student can enter his presence and has room, mokem la'amidas ha'elamis. Now there's room for the student to be able to receive. And then the teacher begins a very spoon-fed, narrow flow of intelligence to his student. That's the example for the Tzimtzum, and how much more so when you're talking about the infinite divine. That's why Keichei HaBligvul, infinite divine, where there's infinite divine consciousness, where's there room for a structured existence like ours? Everything about this existence is defined. There's no room for definition. So the Tzimtzum does two things. It conceals the Eid HaBligvul, the infinite divine consciousness, and it creates room for the Keich HaGvul. Because remember, just as God has the power of infinite, he has the power to create the finite. And now he explains that with the next piece. That indeed, God is not limited just to create infinite. The Bligvul Ugvul Hem Kavim Shkulim Ba'atzmus Ein Seif Baruch Hu. When you talk about Atzmus Ein Sof, you cannot limit him and say he's only Bligvul. He's coming now to explain how is it possible that there be a Gvul. If God is Bligvul, there's no room for Gvul. So he says, no, God is not Bligvul either. So he says the following. Both Bligvul, infinite and finite, are two equal tracks in what we call Atzmus Ein Seif Baruch Hu, in the core essence of the divine. Liyesem Esat Shleimus HaKol Yachol. Why? Because all of them are coming. Every form of energy, infinite or finite, are all coming due to one thing and one thing only. That God is complete and he's capable of everything. And here he brings the famous statement from the Sefer K'de'isa, B'Sefer Avedis HaKedesh, L'Rab Meir Ibn Gabbai, one of the great 13th century Kabbalists, says the following: Ein Sof hu shleimusa dekula. Ein Sof is the ultimate perfection of everything. Kishem sheyesh lekeich bebilti gvul, just as he has the power to create something infinite without limits, kach yesh lekeich begvul, so too does he have the power to create the finite. The im tamer, because if you would say sheyesh lekeach bebilti gvul, the ein lekeach begvul, that he could only create the infinite and not the finite. Hariyat mechasa shlemuse. That alone tells you that he has a flaw. You're weakening his perfection. It's a powerful statement. In other words, to say God is infinite is equally limiting as saying God creates the finite. And that's why you have to say, the Ein Sof hu shleimusa dekula. And Ein Sof is the perfection of all. So you have to say that he has the ability to create both. So what do we establish now? A few things. Number one, that you need concealment, because you need to conceal the infinite for the finite to emerge. And the finite emerges because God has the power to create finite. But that finite cannot emerge unless the infinite is concealed. Like the example of the teacher and the student. Interesting, important point to make right now. 50 years after 770 was purchased in 1940. So in 1990, Tov Shinun, a Maimer, a discourse of the Rebbe, was published that's based on this discourse. It was a Maimer that was delivered actually in this room, this very room, on Shabbos Parsha Kadeshim, 1954, Tov Shin Yudalet. And in the later years, as I said, in the year 1990, it was prepared and the Rebbe edited it. And there we find some explanations of these ideas. So let me share one point that the Rebbe explains here. The Rebbe says, why are we saying that the world consists of concealment? And then he goes on to explain that it's only through concealment that the world came to be. So the Rebbe says, because you could say the concealment of existence is only a marginal element. It's not fundamentally the nature of existence. It's like I said with the teacher. It's necessary for the student that the teacher be quiet and not allow his infinite intelligence to overwhelm the student. But it's not necessarily fundamentally. The Eitz Chaim says that's not the case. The mere fact that there's Eir HaBlikvul does not leave room for existence. So in other words, existence is predicated and fundamentally based on concealment, which strengthens the case that the Taich of the Alter Rebbe, that Ha'elam comes from the word Helam. And that's of course what we're building now, is to say that the world, existence, is one and the same as concealment. Because without concealment you have no existence. If the revelation of the divine continued to flow, existence can never come to be. Going back to the initial point, and the creation of the world is through the concealment of light, concealment of divine energy. And now he brings proof to this from our pasuk, the most famous pasuk of all, the first pasuk in Torah. And this is what it says, that in the beginning God created heaven and earth. And what's the word that's used? What's the name of God that's used here? Elokim. That's the emphasis. Bereshit bara Elokim. That's what the pasuk, the verse is telling us. Shem Elokim is the name that indicates on concealment. Asked the Rebbe. And seemingly it's not understood. Why is he using the name Elokim? He's coming to build the case that the world is defined by concealment. But he's doing this with a question. What do you mean? To create something requires a revelation. If everything was just concealed, there'd be no creation. So the klolas inyan habriya, the general creation, comes from Shem Havaya Dafka. The Havaya hu Mahava. The word Havaya, the name Havaya, comes from the word Mahava, to bring something into being. If you don't have something into being, you don't have existence. The Shem Havaya hu Mokara Eris. This, of course, the Frierdiker Rebbe is relying, that we know from other places of Chassidus, that Havaya comes from is the source of Eir. What does Eir mean? An energy that is a forward, progressive energy. It's not concealment. It's not withholding. To create, you need to do something. Think of an artist or an author. If they were just in a state of concealment, nothing would happen. There would be no book written. There'd be no art painted. There'd be no music composed. So creation, by definition, means there's a revelation going on. So the Frierdiker Rebbe is asking on his own words before you. I said, yes, the world is based on concealment, but the fact of the matter is, Havaya is the key element to creation. It's God's, the creative energy that is present in existence. And creation is not from concealment, it comes from air. It's a forward progressive energy. It means you are invested in creating something. And he brings a raya from the Alter Rebbe, Chof-Alef Rabbeinu. This is the Alter Rebbe, Ba'ageres HaKedesh, Dibra Maskul, Iyu V'chayu Ichad. So this is Ageres HaKedesh, Siman Chof. Famous letter that the Alter Rebbe wrote just a few weeks before he passed away. Very fundamental Chassidus. And one of the things he says there is that for creation to happen, God had to extend his creative energy. What we call Eir is God's creative energy. So we have a question here. Till now we were saying that the world is based on concealment, the concealment of light, but the fact of the matter is, there's no creation if there's no revelation. Havaya, and the words of Ageres HaKedesh from Eir. Im Kain, and this is the end of the question, why does it say Bereshis bara Elokim? Because Havaya is the creative energy. So it should have said in the beginning, God, Havaya created. Why does he say that it was the name of Elokim that he used for creation? And here's the answer. However, the reason is, in other words, the reason why he's using the name Elokim, yes, it's true that you need air, the creative energy, but if you don't have concealed air, if you don't channel that energy, you cannot have a creation. So Helam is vital. You just told me that the Hisava's creation is through the Etzem Ha'er with the essential element of light, a revelation. That's what he says in Ageres HaKedesh, the light that is attached and connected. Because what is the essential nature of light? As I said, creative energy. Light is a reflection of its source. Sunlight is a reflection of the sun. The light of a flame is a reflection of a candle. Creative energy is the reflection of the Creator. So Eir, because it's a reflection and attached and a channel for divine creative energy, that's the creation. You just said that. And now the Frierdiker Rebbe goes back. So even though he asked the question, he answered the Helam, he goes back and elaborates some more about the Gili Eir. This is not uncommon in a mimer, that sometimes he says something and begins to answer, but then he goes to elaborate more details. We'll discuss in a moment what's the point here. Why is he trying to split it here? Is it concealment? Is it revelation? It's fundamental to the whole theme of the mimer, as we'll see in shortly. So now he goes back. The tam v'sibas hadover b'pnei ma'ir mahave. Why taka? How could Eir be mahave? Eir doesn't have any power of its own. Lefi shadovek ba'amoyer, because it's attached and connected to its source. So let's use again a human example. An artist decides he's going to create a piece of art. So you need two things. You need the artist should want to do it, and then he invests his energy. When he's creating the art, that's his Eir. Now, if the Eir was not, his creative energy was not connected with the artist itself, it wouldn't be able to achieve anything. So Eir is basically his instrument of expression. It's another way of calling Eir Vigili. Eir expresses what God wants. So basically he's saying, why Eir? Because Eir is the epitome and personifies a connection. Every light is completely dedicated to its source. If, for example, you commission somebody to go create the art for you, they may not do exactly what you want, they may do something actually opposite. Eir is a faithful instrument, to put it in other terms. So because it's Dovik Ba'amoyer, Imkena Ikaru Amoyer, the Eir doesn't have any identity of its own. All it's doing is the bidding of its source. So now we're back to the question. You just said that the existence is based on concealment. Now we're back that the existence is predicated on revelation. Which one is it? She says, B'chol zeh. Nevertheless, is going back. Hine mahamoyer ba'atzmei. If it straight came unfiltered from the source, through its reflective creative energy, if it came from the moyer itself, it's too intense, it's too powerful. It has to go through the channel of a reflection of the source. And now he's going to give an example for this from sunlight. So what is he doing here? What is the Frierdiker Rebbe explaining to us? He's explaining to us that yes, in order for existence to emerge in a state of divine bligvul, you need to have a tzimtzum. But tzimtzum is not the only part of the story. You need revelation too, because creation doesn't happen without revelation. And he's trying to balance both of these and come to explain why it says Bereshis bara Elokim. And now he's going to give an example to explain it. The example's from the sun, sunlight. What does it say? U'kamoi begashmi is, and this is again very common in Chassidus Chabad. We use a physical example from the natural world, like it is in the physical world. Hine kol hatzmochim mekablim tiv tzmichosam ubishulam al yedei hashemesh. All plants and all vegetation, how do they grow? We know you have to plant the seed, you have to water it, but you need sunlight. Without sunlight, no plant, no vegetation can truly blossom and grow. So he says, Kol hatzmochim mekablim tiv tzmichosam. Tiv means the quality of really growing and blossoming properly, ubishulam, and its development, al yedei hashemesh, through the sun. That grain grows through the sun. You need the sunlight. Now, here's the question. Imagine the sun is burning, a hot day. What would happen to the plants? You ever see what happens to a garden when the sun is very intense? It can completely destroy the garden. So what's going on here? You need the sun on one hand. On the other hand, you need the sun to be filtered. Because if it was there without any filters, it would destroy all vegetation. So he continues. So we have a pasuk, Shemesh u'mogen Hashem Elokim. Shemesh u'mogen. What's mogen? Mogen means a shield, a sheath. The sun has a type of film around it that somewhat weakens and harnesses the sunlight. Like when you look at the sun directly, it can blind your eyes. You put shades on, or some way you create some filter, you can look at the sun. So on one hand, you must have the sun, but on the other hand, you have to have the sun in some diminished state. And that's the moshel he's giving to bring us back to understand creation. From the sun alone, you cannot receive. You must have this shield, or sheath, or filter. These are all good words. Some partition. It's like a cover on the sun. Not a cover that it completely conceals the sun, obviously. We're not talking about a solar eclipse. We're talking about somewhat filtering, somewhat weakening the intensity of the pure sun. That's the moshel. Now he goes back to the nimshal, to the moral, and the same thing is in creation. The way God created existence, he gave us examples from the natural world to understand how he created. What did he do? Like we said from Ageres HaKedesh. There's no creation if it doesn't come from the source. From the mo'er, meaning the source of light. So it doesn't come straight from the mo'er, it goes through the reflection of the mo'er, which is the oir. Like the sunlight, the light of the divine source. And this is what it says, the pasuk I just referred to, Shemesh u'mogen is an example for Havaya and Elokim. Shemesh is the original source. Mogen is its sheath. Same thing, Havaya is the Mahava, the Moir, and the Oir, and Elokim is like the sheath that filters the sun. The Keshem Shum Ba'Shemesh u'mogen. Just as it is the sun and its sheath, Shehu HaMechase Ala Shemesh, that conceals the sun, that allows the sun, the rays of the sun, to not destroy and overwhelm. Sha'ikir Hu Etzem HaShemesh. The primary thing is the core sun. V'rak Shaboyel De'akisi Shu HaMogen. It only comes through this filter, which is called the sheath of the sun, the shell of the sun. Think of it like you have a projector of light, white light. Very powerful light. If you don't put a film in front of it, you won't be able to see anything. So you need the light, because if you don't have the light, all you have is darkness. You need the light, and then you need the film, the filter, that, so to speak, allows to channel the light so you can see letters, images, and so on. So essentially what he's really doing here is giving us the dynamic of all creative process. A creative process consists of two things. You need a flow of energy, that's called air. And then the second thing you need is to filter and channel that air. So a good teacher doesn't just know how to teach and share ideas. He knows how to express them in a way that's tailored to the recipient. So if you have only light, it's not going to fit the containers, the recipients. On the other hand, if you only have concealment, you don't have creation. So now he's going to conclude this chapter by telling us what he began with, that existence is defined by concealment, but it's a concealment that is channeling revelation. And this is what he says. Just as it is with Shemesh U'Mogen, the first half of the pasuk, the sun and its filter and its sheath, same is Havaya Lakim, Shemesh U'Mogen Havaya Lakim, Sheisav Esim Shem Havaya. Remember we said Havaya from the word Mahava. Hisavas comes from the Havaya, the creator. Raksha Poyel Hu Aidei Shem Elakim. It's affected through. Its functionality comes through the name Elikim. So it's basically Havaya shining through Elikim, like the sun shining through its filter. So what do we have? We have our answer. That's why it says Bereshis Bara Elikim. So yes, it comes from Havaya, but if you don't have Elikim, you're not going to have a creation. Going back to the initial point that he made in the beginning of this chapter, what did he say? He said existence Olam is from the word Helam, because it's not possible without a concealment. If the divine energy was everywhere, as it was before the Tzimtzum, as the Eitz Chaim says, there'd be no room for existence. It would be like the sun completely burning up earth, as an example. So you need the sun, but you need the sun to come through a filter. That's what the Tzimtzum does. The Tzimtzum does, it conceals the light in order to be able to create an independent consciousness beyond the consciousness of the divine, that pre-Tzimtzum was the only thing that existed. Now, interesting, the Frierdiker Rebbe now adds two more lines in about Vayin Elikim, which, as Chassidim, we consider and analyze why he adds it, but this is what he says. He says, V'yadua, it's known that the Shemus Havaya Elikim, these two names, Havaya and Elikim, have also another element to them, besides revelation and concealment. Heim teva u'lamayla min teva. Havaya refers to lamayla min teva, meaning transcends nature, beyond the laws of nature, and Elikim is actually gematria hateva. He doesn't say that here, but that says in other places. Elikim is the divine as it manifests through nature. And here's what the Frierdiker Rebbe says: the be'emes hine klolos ha'anoga shel lamayla. In truth, the general behavior from above is l'mayla min teva. Everything is l'mayla min teva. V'rak shabo b'levushei teva. It only manifests, in other words, it appears to us as it's working through the garments of nature. Now, we probably all heard about Purim. Purim, was it a natural event or was it miraculous events? It was really l'mayla min teva, except it was dressed up. You didn't see a parting of the sea. You didn't see anything that suspended nature. But when you look at the story, you see that God worked in his own invisible way and ultimately created the miracle of Purim. It's the classic example. Now, why does the Frierdiker Rebbe add this? I'll just say, yesh lema b'derech efshar. That perhaps he wants to refer to, remember, Jews needed a Hatzalah now. They were under the hands of the Nazis, Yimach Shemam. And perhaps he was invoking that really we need Havaya l'mayla min teva. So even though ostensibly on the surface level, things seem to be under the control of nature, but the truth is really above nature is in control. It's just a thought. I can't say that's for sure pshat, because it seems like why is he suddenly talking about nature and above nature? But regardless, getting back to our theme, concealment and revelation, the nature of existence is defined by concealment, but it's a concealment over something that is revealed, like the sun needs a funnel, needs a channel to be able to appreciate the sun, and it shouldn't destroy existence. That ends chapter 1. So we finished chapter 1 in this Maimer, and to sum up, the world stands, says the Mishnah, on Teira Aveidu Gemilas Chasadim. Teaches the Alter Rebbe that the word world means Helem. The concealment stands on Teira Aveidu Gemilas Chasadim. And the Frierdiker Rebbe explained in the Maimer, in chapter 1, what does this mean, this concealment? Because the world is defined by concealment. But on the other hand, we see the world has also revelation. Creation is defined by creative, revealed energy. Says the Pasuk, Bereishis bara Elokim, like Shemesh U'Mogen Hashem Elokim, just like the sun needs to shine through its filter, needs to shine through its sheath, its Mogen. Havaya, the creative energy, shines through the Oyer, shines through a concealment of the Tzimtzum, which allows for creation to manifest. So bottom line is that existence is based on concealment, and yet the concealment is carrying and channeling energy, light. Now, in context of what we said, that the world there in 1940 was going through the deepest concealment ever, Hastir Hastir Ponai, God's complete concealment, as the Jews were being massacred, you could see the Frierdiker Rebbe is dissecting, going into the engine room of concealment itself to understand the concealment of the divine in existence. As we'll learn now in chapter 2, a tremendous chidush in understanding the very nature of concealment. So Perek Beis, it's going back to the theme in the beginning of chapter 1, and this is the meaning. The Alter Rebbe's Taich. Three things the world stands. What is the world? Ha'elam, ha'helam emed. Not just the world in general creation. The concealment, which is the very essence of what allows creation to be. What does it reside on? What does it rest upon? What pillars? On the three things, Teira Aveidu Gemilas Chasadim. Which of course immediately begs the question, what does that mean? The concealment rides on Teira Aveidu Gemilas Chasadim. Seemingly the opposite. Teira Aveidu Gemilas Chasadim is the way to get rid of the concealment. When a person serves God, he studies Teira, he davens, Aveidah, he does good deeds, Gemilas Chasadim, he eliminates the concealment. So what does it mean to say the concealment stands and rides on this? This is how the Rebbe explains this piece in his Maimer in Tafshin Yudalid. Answers the Frierdiker Rebbe, V'kavonas ha'helem u'b'shvil ha'gilui. The reason for this is because the real intention of the concealment is in order to bring revelation. Remember what we just said earlier. Why does the sun have a mogen? Not to conceal, to reveal in a way that the recipients can receive and it doesn't destroy the fields. It makes things grow. So concealment's intention, the whole kavanah of concealment is in order to reveal. So now we've introduced a new point. Not only does existence consist of a mixture of revelation and concealment, which is very understandable. Like a brilliant teacher, he's teaching a student, so there's revelation in what he's teaching, but it's filtered, it's channeled, it's guided. Like Shemesh U'Mogen Hashem Elokim, as we learned. So fundamentally, creation is a creative process, but for that creative process to actually create another entity requires a tzimtzum. But we still haven't really understood the role of the concealment itself. And here's where comes the deeper interpretation. The Alter Rebbe teaches that on three things the Helem stands, not just the world stands. The world, you'd say, creation stands on Teira Aveidu Gemilas Chasadim because the whole world, its purpose is to bring Teira mitzvahs into the world, the light. But how could you say that concealment stands on Teira Aveidu Gemilas Chasadim? On the contrary, Teira Aveidu Gemilas Chasadim actually removes the concealment. It brings and reveals godliness in this world. In the Rebbe's Maimer, he says these words. He says, It's actually bringing revelation. So how could you say it's the basis of the concealment? The answer is because the whole purpose of concealment is not concealment, it's revelation. Even the darkest tzimtzum that left a complete space, everything was concealed. Its purpose is to bring revelation. So he says, it's in order to bring revelation. That by removing the concealment, you reveal Mizgala Er Pnimi Hatzofum Ba'Helam. Now the Frierdiker Rebbe now is going to explain with a moshel, with an example of a teacher and a student. But before we go there, what you really see, the seed is being planted now, that even concealment is not an end in itself, which is a tremendous lesson in life. Because many of us feel at times, you go through a difficult period in your life. So you say, you know what, it's difficult now, but things are going to get better. See, we have hope, we have bitachon, trust, we have amunah, things are going to get better. But you don't feel that the darkness itself is part of becoming better. What the chiddush that's being said now is, no, the darkness itself is not an end in itself. It can deceive us into thinking that now it's all dark. But in truth, within it is embedded the process of revelation. So it's actually really a deeper revelation that's not yet emerged. So think of it like a crack in an egg. The egg cracks, you say, hey, that's a bad thing. The egg is cracking. But then you suddenly see a chick, a new life emerge. You realize the crack was part of the birthing. If you don't see it through, the pain can seem as an end in itself. So concealment, he's saying, is in essence really deeper revelation. And that's what we need to be able to access, which is going to be the continuing theme. But now the Frierdiker Rebbe is going to use a moshel to explain. How could you say that the Helam is Kavanas HaHelam Gilui? You could say you need the Gilui needs to be channeled through the Helam, as we discussed in the previous chapter. To say the Helam itself, and that's going to, of course, explain the Alter Rebbe's Vort, the powerful Vort. What he's saying is, yes, the Helam itself, since its purpose is Gilui, how do you create the Gilui? So if the Helam was just a concealment, then Teira V'Di Mils Chasadim is actually fighting the concealment. You can't say the concealment rests upon Eimid. The Helam, Eimid on Teira V'Di Mils Chasadim. No, it's a contradiction. Concealment is opposite of Gilui. And then the Gilui of Teira Mitzvahs, Teira V'Di Mils Chasadim, challenges the concealment. But if the whole purpose of concealment is revelation, then the concealment actually rests upon the revelation. And Teira V'Di Mils Chasadim reveals the true purpose of the concealment. Which of course is going to have far-reaching implications when you're dealing with a concealment like the Holocaust, as we shall discuss. Now goes the example. This example will really make it very real in our lives, not just as a theory. A teacher that desires to transmit seichel, intelligence. He wants to communicate and transmit intelligence to his student. What's the intention of the teacher? He wants a student not just to understand superficially, he wants them to understand all the depth of the inner dimensions of this idea. Remember, it's a teacher that cares about a student and wants to give him the best, not the least. But he can't do so because the student is a beginner. Let's say the student knows how to read Aleph Beis, or he knows how to read a pasuk, but he doesn't understand the depth yet. So what does a teacher do? He loves his student. He wants to give him all the depth, but the student is not ready yet. It's not commensurate yet to the intelligence of the student. So what does he do? The only way to get this done is that the teacher conceals the core depth of this idea in this shebe'inyanahu, whatever he's teaching, and he only reveals to the student that which the student can hear and understand right now. I wanted to say, whenever Chassidim learned this in a Maimer, the example of a teacher-student, we always understood that Rebbe was talking about a Rebbe and his Chassidim. He wants to give everything, but they're beginners, or they're too distracted, they're not ready yet. So what do you do when you love your child? You love your student, and you can't say everything. So what do you have to do? Is you say what he's capable of understanding. And once the student receives that which he's capable of receiving, then his mind expands and opens up. He grows and matures. And in time, as time passes, he's capable of also understanding the depth. He says not just emek, depth, but also pnimius, the inner kavana, the inner intention, which he could not pick up earlier. He doesn't bring this here, but often we talk about Adar Boyin Shnin Loikoi Inu Shadaita Derab. You heard something from your teacher 40 years ago, and he planted the seed. Then 40 years later you say, now I understood what he meant. A type of epiphany, a revelation. But it was all planted there, because the teacher gave the student at the time what he was able to hear. And later he comes to discover the inner depth with time. So this is continuing the example that the Helam is B'Shvil Hagili, as we'll continue. V'rak kol zeh, all this is possible, is a condition. Because if the teacher now has concealed some of his ideas so the student can receive, how do you know? How will you reach the depth? He says, "Hu kasher atalmid miyageyes atzmei." The student exerts himself. Lahasir helam hamisholim v'hatzos she'emer lo harav b'tchilas gili haskala. If the student does nothing, will it emerge, the depth? Not necessarily. So he's saying there's a condition. The student has to exert himself to remove the concealment of all the examples. And atzos are like the presentations that the teacher gave him in the beginning when he began to teach him. So the student, as he grows and expands, mitpateach, as he expands his mind, what he has to do is now say, that moshel was only an example to teach me something deeper. And now he's going to go back to the nimshal, to the moral. So what did we learn from this moshel? Let's just sum up what we learned. That the concealment that the teacher conceals, the deeper ideas, is not because he wants to conceal, because the student isn't ready to receive it yet. So what he does is he gives him what he can give him, but anything he conceals is b'shvil hagili, and in order to get that gili, the student has to now work on removing that which was concealed. So now he says the same thing is in the Aveda. Going back to the Mishnah, Al Gimel Shleisha Dvarim HaHelam Oimid. It's going to say like this. The same things when we remove the concealment in the world. Because we see the world, we don't see the elikus, we don't see godliness. You look at the world, you see walls, you see doors, you see people, you see birds, day, night. So you say the same thing when we remove the helam, the concealment that conceals the divine energy that is within the existence. How do you remove it? It's through these three things: Teira, Aveda, Tefillah, and Gemilas Chasadim. So that's what he's saying now. So basically, the example is that we see, since the Helam is B'Shvil HaGilui, that's why Shleisha Dvarim HaElam Emid. The Helam, because the Helam is to bring Gilui, how do you bring that Gilui? Through Teira, Aveda, Gemilas Chasadim. And by that you remove the concealment. Okay. I want to share the following. Very moving and memorable moment with the Rebbe. The year was Tovshin Lamites, Tu B'Shvat. The Rebbe was speaking about Golus, the concealment of Golus, and he brought the famous mashal of a father who hides from his son. He conceals himself with the intention, B'Shvil HaGilui. Not because he wants to conceal himself, he wants the son to elicit the son's ingenuity to figure out where the father is. So when you want to bring out someone's inner strengths, you conceal yourself. And now you say to the son, find me. So the whole Helam, why God created, he concealed his presence, so we should find him. But what happens if God concealed himself so well, and the son begins to search one day, a second day, and he doesn't find his father? At some point, this is the Rebbe's words, said it in Yiddish, and began to cry.
Sonntag ist so, Montag ist so.
Sunday, he's seeking his father. Monday, he's looking for him. Tuesday, he's looking for him. And nothing's happening. He can't find him. So at some point, and the Rebbe began to now cry. You couldn't even hear his words. The Rebbe said, at some point, his son gives up. The child gives up. He thinks his father left him. And he forgets that maybe the whole concealment is for the revelation. He forgets. He says, "Uner's nit schuldig." He's not responsible. Viful zashir. How much God concealed himself so well. Why are you blaming the child? You, God, concealed yourself. And the Rebbe began to cry and cry, and it was like very overwhelming. Mama's this theme, that the whole concealment is in order to reveal. But the problem is we can give in and we don't see through the concealment. We feed into it. And we think, oh, it's reality. It was a chassid, I think Hill Paratcher, or another chassid. In the summer, in the Russian summers, it was very hot. There's no air conditioning. So what are you doing? It's very hot. So they would go into these cellars, into these basements that were cooler because it was outside of the sun. It was underground. It was cooler, just to relieve themselves of the heat. One day, Rabbi Hillel Paratcher goes into one of these cellars, and it's also very dark because there was no electricity. So he goes down the steps. It's so dark, he says, "Hazeh finster, it's terribly dark here." So one of the chassidim who was down there says, "Don't worry, you'll get used to it soon, and you'll be able to start seeing." You know what happens? You stay in the dark for long enough, you start seeing a little. And Rabbi Hillel started crying. He said, "Das wegen dem habe ich made. I don't want to get used to it." Sometimes darkness becomes your comfort zone. Pain can be your comfort zone, to the point you say, "Hey, at least I'm comfortable with it, I know it." You don't want the Helam to be a kavanah for itself. The whole purpose of existence, concealment, is because God wanted us to reveal and find him. When we give up looking, it's the most painful thing, because then what happens to the father? He says, "I hid myself for my son to connect with me." And he disconnected, he thinks I disappeared. He thinks I'm no longer here. That's what the Frierdiker Rebbe is saying. That concealment is essentially really a form of revelation. But we need to be wise, like the student. If a student thinks my teacher is giving me aleph beis, he's giving me little superficial ideas, then of course he's not going to go dig deeper. But when he knows the teacher loves him, and he knows the teacher wants to give him all the depth, but he needs to work, he needs to remove the concealment. That's the work we need to do. But Ot stellt sich a big question. How do you have the strength? The Rebbe himself said, Tov Shalom Etes. What did the Rebbe say? In this very building again. What did the Rebbe say? The Rebbe said, Vivul Zashir. You hid yourself, you God concealed yourself so well. What do you want from the child? So now the Frierdiker Rebbe is going to explain to us where we have the koyach. What taka was? I mean, people were going to the gas chambers. 1.5 million children were being gassed. Innocent men, women, and children for no other reason than being Jewish. Don't you think that many of them would say, Viful Zashir? What are you telling me? You want me to find God in the ovens, in the crematoriums, in the darkest of darkest hell on earth? So where do you get the koyach? And the Frierdiker Rebbe is now going to answer that. And I've all played the maimah that he said on Chof-Alef Elul 80 years ago, in the throes of the Holocaust. There's no question that he was addressing this issue when you start reading the spirit of what he's saying now. So he's going to say, where do we have the koyach? And the koyach is going to come from the deep love that God has to the Jewish people. That God has a love to the Jews to the point that God does not allow concealment to affect it. And that empowers us to be able to see through the concealment and ultimately remove it through Teira Vedic Milas Chasadim. So the Helam Eimet, the Helam, which is the whole purpose of the Helam, is to reveal. So you would think, if it's a Helam, you know what, I'm giving up. Why would I even want to have a relationship with God with such concealment? But once you know the concealment is Eimet, is B'Shvil HaGili, then you know it's Eimet, and Teira Vedic Milas Chasadim. Actually, the solution to the concealment is to reveal godliness through Teira and Vedic Milas Chasadim, because that's the purpose of the concealment itself. So it's counterintuitive. Most of us would think if it's concealed, you know what? Right now I can't do this anymore. It says no, once you know the concealment is B'Shvil HaGilui, if you give up, you're giving up the essence of it all. The purpose of the concealment is to reveal, and we need your Teira Vedic Milas Chasadim to do so. And this Aveda of revealing that concealment is truly a step toward deeper revelation was given dafke, specifically to the souls of Israel, Neshamas Yisrael. What does this mean? So he's going to say, the Pasuk says, Dahafti eschem omer havaya. I love you, says Hashem. He's referring to Eden. I love you. And this love is going to give us the strength. And because of this essential and core love, coming from the depths, the essential love, to Neshamas Yisrael, to the souls of Israel, that's why Hashem gave us Teira Mitzvahs. He bestowed upon us Teira Mitzvahs. V'hakeches la'avdei yizbarach, and the strengths and potential and power and abilities to serve God, ba'avedas hamoyach, with working, exerting our minds, lahavinu lahaskil binyonei elokus, to understand and to conceive in matters of godliness and the divine, u'ba'avedas halev, and working with our heart, levarer lezachiches haguf, to cleanse and to refine the body, v'chol inyonei elam hazeh, and all matters of this material world, and to illuminate and to radiate the world with the light of Teira Mitzvahs. So we always hear this, that a Jew is supposed to do Teira Mitzvahs. So he's explaining, no, Jews comes from the deep love of God. He's sending us to this world, a dark world, with all the challenges. And everybody knows, Yodinish Benafshi, everyone knows what challenges we go through. It's out of love, not out of anything else. It's giving us the strength, the power, the ability, the gift, the responsibility to connect to Hashem, to reveal. And he says here, Avedas HaMeach, which sounds like Teira. Then Avedas HaLev sounds like Aveda. And Milas Chasadim, Levara Lezachich Saguf. So it looks like he's hinting to all the three, Teira, Aveda, Milas Chasadim. All a gift coming from God's deep love. Ahafti Eschem. Friedrich Rebbe now goes into a very powerful piece, which is a lesson for all of us at all times. He says, Zehu gam ken hatam, and this is also the reason Masha Kodesh Baruch Hu eina shemeya, why God does not listen ledivrei hamakatrigim, to the words of those that accuse, the accusers. Makatrig is a word, a very strong word, of those that accusing angels, those that come, the prosecuting angels. They're always coming with complaints, critique, showing the flaws. So he says God doesn't listen to these words. Hamakatrigim al Yisrael, those that come with all types of incriminations and accusations against Eden. V'tevim din kosher chas v'sholem, and they demand strong justice, severe judgment, God forbid. So you wonder, who's he talking about? Who are these mekatrigim? Does he mean in heaven? Does he mean on earth? So I just share from the way I understand it. Remember again, this is 1940. It was a big kitrug on Eden. Eden were being massacred. I mean, Chmona Litzlan, what was going on? So, it was clearly a kitrug, whether it's above, whether it's below. But people were saying, Eden are worth it, that I'm not worth it. They deserve. There's a story, a famous story. One of the Chredische Rabbonim. It was by the Frierdiker Rebbe. During the Holocaust, or right afterwards. And he began to explain. He said, look, the Jews were forsaking God. They were doing things hepech haTorah. So this is what they deserve. He was like explaining the Holocaust. The Frierdiker Rebbe said to him, Shah, be quiet. God doesn't need an advocate. The Eibishter darf nicht kein advocate. God doesn't need a lawyer to defend him. So whether he was referring to Shash Mekatrigim or other Mekatrigim, we may never know. But here it's a general statement. Anyone, anytime, comes and starts complaining to God and say, look what your people are doing, and this is not good, and that's not good, he says, nah. The Ava Atzmis, the deep love of God to the Jewish people, he doesn't want to hear these critiques. In other words, we're not even getting to whether it's legitimate or not. He's not interested. That's what he says here. It's strong words. It's a line, I think you can hang it up in every shul, in every home. These words. He doesn't listen to these accusations, these accusers. Din kosher. You know what kind of words that means? Both then and now. Anyone facing a challenge. And you see a real concealment, real darkness. So the Ava Atzmis of the Eibishter, the core love that God has to the Jewish people, doesn't listen to this. This is due. The word Ava Atzmis is a very powerful expression. It doesn't just say he loves the Jewish people. Hafti eschem Omer Havaya. Atzmis. Atzmis means through and through. The core essence of God is loving the Jew, loving the Jewish people. And now he explains this in detail. He's going to explain two types of love. Now, in the Ian of Ava, the matter of love, yesh dargis chalukas. There are different levels of love. A person loves his friend, but ava nafshis means a really soulful and full love, deep love. Rachel Shmeya, love Shmuas Tevis. What is the indicator? What is the effect? When you really love someone, ava nafshis, you want to hear good things about him. And no way do you want to hear the Shmeya Shmuas Tevis. Negative things. You love someone deeply, you don't want to hear negative things. I want to hear good things about my friend. And when someone speaks negative, matchi pushes him away, says, I don't want to hear this, don't go away from me. And he stops himself from listening. Look how much the extent the Rebbe is saying, telling us how love doesn't want in any way to relate to anything negative. Nevertheless, even in this deep love, he called it ava nafshis, not stam superficial love. Even this level of love, yesh chiluki dargis, there are levels. There are different levels. And what determines the different types of love? According to the causes, why taka do you love this person? Why do you love one person ava nafshis, another person not necessarily? So he's going to now explain the different causes that bring people to love. When love comes due to a rational reason. Chiva seichel means seichel, intelligence compels the love. You have a good reason. Your mind tells you it's worthy of loving this person. And he's going to explain two different ways where seichel is mechayev. Kamoy machmas hatev shalei. Like, for example, due to the goodness of the person. In Yiddish, the Rabbeim throw in Yiddish for emphasis. Was is be'etzem a guter Mensch. This person that you love, he's a fundamentally good person. Und a guten Mensch haben alle lieb. And a good person everyone loves. Beautiful how the Frierdiker Rebbe says it. A good person people love. But that's a reason, because he's a good person. Oi, another reason that you would love someone, the love is coming because the person has done good to you. He was mashpia to you, he brought you good things. He did a favor for you. Bein hashpah ruchnis, either hashpah ruchnis, a spiritual gift or a spiritual favor, something ruchnisdik, bashpah seichel, midas, tevis, or like he gave you seichel, he taught you something, or he was an example that taught you a good midah, how to be a more refined person. Or hashpah gashmis, or he actually gave you something gashmis, like a gashmi, a physical favor. So now we're talking about an ava that's coming machmas haseichel. Keep that in mind. A love that's coming due to a reason. Either the person is a good person, and people like a good person, or because he did you a favor. So he says, even such love, you also want to hear good things about this person. You don't want to hear bad things. You don't want to hear bad news. You don't want to hear critique and negative things. And what's the reason? Since you already established your seichel, compelled you to love this person, either because they're a good person or because they did you favors. So you've already established this person I love. So doesn't want to change the seichel. So someone comes to you and says something bad about this person you love, even though there's a reason for it, but you're already committed to this. Besides the seichel, he already has now established a loving relationship to him. Albeit it came because of a reason. But now he's loving him. So the Frierdiker Rebbe continues. Besides the fact that there's a logical reason why you love the person, that compels you to love the person, the etzem thing that you already love him also has an effect. So two things. Your seichel has established that this person is a good person or did a favor, so therefore you're invested in loving this person and not wanting to hear negative things. And also the love you've already developed for this person. Love brings more love, basically. So when you have love, the love continues. And on the contrary, when you hear something negative, if there's anything that challenges, something that's like an obstacle, an impediment, that says, 1 second, this person you love is not such a good person. On the contrary, you know what that does? It's ma'erer, it evokes in you love and strengthening your love that I'm going to be more committed. That's the initial approach. So even though the love is based on seichel, and for a reason, you're still invested in it, and if there's a challenge to that love due to critique, it can evoke in you a certain type of not chonis, he doesn't say that word, but a type of I want to establish, no, I really love this person, I'll be even more love the person. It's like when someone criticizes a friend of yours, you defend them even more. Nevertheless, these bad shmuas, when you hear negative things, even about someone you love deeply, they can cause a weakness, they can weaken the love. Like we actually see. That when you hear lashon hara, bad things about someone, and achilas, slander, they can even separate between people who love each other. Amitim, not fake. True people who love each other. When you speak lashon hara, you can weaken the bond. Because you slowly begin to consider that maybe there's something about it, this critique maybe has some merit. Ulai be'emes, maybe in truth, maybe this person is not exactly as good as you thought he was. And then it's possible that the love will actually cease. Ta'ava hatluya bedover, because when it's an ava that's dependent on a reason, some ulterior reason, botl dover, botla ava. When the thing stops, the ava also will stop. So it's true, it's ava nafshis, but at the end of the day, because there's a condition, the condition causes that the ava can be weakened until it actually can be severed. Now we finish chapter 2. Here's something really unique and powerful. In one of the diaries that describe this momentous event 80 years ago, Chof-Alef Elul, was that at this point, after the second chapter, the Frierdiker Rebbe unfolded the handkerchief from his hands, and he turned and indicated that he wanted them to bring the kos, a cup, to drink from. And he drank from the cup, and then he made a brocha achrena, and then he told them to sing a song, and afterwards he took the handkerchief again, tied it, and began continuing chapter 3, Vihine. So let's all say l'chaim. Frierdiker Rebbe said we say l'chaim after chapter 2, so we say l'chaim. We say l'chaim, the 80th year. The Rebbe is with us. The Chassidim are with us. The very walls that we're sitting in are all testifying. Even Mikir Tizak, all the events that happened then. Vayomim mehem b'zman hazeh, hayomim me'elin niskarim v'nasim. As I said at the outset, the time is eternal. It's not a moment. It's now. L'chaim Rebbe, l'chaim unser Rebbe, l'chaim the Rebbe, the Harayats. And we now will continue, as the Frierdiker Rebbe did then, with Vihine, l'chaim. So Pei de Gimel. Vihine, and now he continues, Kol zeh, everything we spoke about till now, which is about the Ava. But it's a love, even though it's a deep love, but it's conditional. And therefore, when you hear something negative, even about a good friend that helped you, a good person, it can weaken your love. But now we're going to learn about a love that does not get weakened no matter what. Kol zeh ba'ava hatluya be'ezu tam sichli. All this is a love that's dependent on some logical reason. Avol kasher avihi atzmis. And here, coming back to the word atzmis. Again, avol kasher avihi atzmis. But when the love is a atzmisdika love, meaning from the core, from your very core of your being, not due to any reason. It's just a core atzmisdika connection between you and what you love. Not due to any compelling reason, to any rationale. It's coming from the etzem, and I'll soon give examples what that means. He does not want to hear a negative thing about the person he loves. His entire desire and his will is to hear only good on the person he loves. And no manner and no way. He wants l'shmeya eze dover leitev, anything that's not good. Shedeche kol menagid la'eyave. He pushes aside anything, anyone that opposes to the person that he loves. So if someone comes to him with even one small thing, anything, that says something negative about the one he loves, he will reject him completely. Umishtamit milishmeya. And he stops himself from listening. He's not interested in any possible way. Mishtamit l'shmeya milishmeya shum davara. Any negative or evil thing al eyave, on the person he loves, ke'eni yochel klal ishmeya. Because he's not capable of listening to anything negative on someone he loves. I mean, every word here is dripping with love. You see how the Frierdiker Rebbe in this Maimon is describing the love of God to the Jewish people. And not just one sentence, how he emphasizes. He doesn't want to hear negative, only positive. Anyone that comes negative, he pushes aside. I mean, this is such a living example of what Avos Yisrael is, unconditional love. And you can imagine why it was so important when such a Helam and Gzeiras Koshes and Mekatrigim. So Frierdiker Rebbe is giving the antidote of what true Atzmizdika love is. Einu yochel klal lishmeya. It's even deeper. He can't even listen. You love someone so deeply you can't even hear a negative thing. The kamoy she'einu yochel lishmeya davar al atzmei. And now he's explaining it in a personal way. Just like you can't hear something negative about yourself. Mipnei she'adam korav etzel atzmei. Because a person is close to himself. It's a lashon in Chazal. Adam korav etzel atzmei. We're subjective about ourselves. Absolutely, we're not objective. Someone comes and says a critical thing about you. It doesn't mean you can't at all hear it, but you don't take it in full intensity. You reject it. And a person doesn't see a chayv, he doesn't see his own flaws, he doesn't see his own shortcomings. Sometimes Chassidus brings the Chazal, he sees everybody's flaws except his own. So just like it is with yourself, that you cannot see a flaw on yourself, he doesn't want and he's not capable to hear something bad, something negative on a person who he loves, kenafshe. He loves him like he loves himself. And even if he does hear something, well, let's say something, he ends up hearing something negative about this person he loves unconditionally. It doesn't have any impact on him. As if he never heard it. And now he's going to give an example of a father and a son. Like the love of a father to a child, to a son. Why does he love him? Not for any reason. I'm sorry. No. I'm not sorry. Sorry. Let me go. Because he is his core essence. It's a piece of him. He doesn't want and not capable to hear about him things that are not fitting, not appropriate, God forbid. Maybe im shama. Let me correct it. V'im shama, and if he does hear, hu ki'ilu lo shama. It's as if he'd never heard it. Li yesei memuhusei va'atzmei, because the child is from his muhus and etzem, from the core essence of the parent, of the father. Va'avosei elov hi ava atzmis, and the love that he has to him is a core love. So this is all the moshel, the example that he gave from self-love and the love of a parent to a child, to explain what unconditional love is. And this type of love cannot be weakened by anything. In conditional love that we spoke for a reason, negative stories, slander, and other things can weaken the love. Here, it's not, it's unwavering. So this unconditional love, with the example of the father and the child, brings to mind that in this very room, the Rebbe, Birchas Habonim, Erev Yom Kippur, in that high point, would demonstrate his deep love for the Bochrim. And the Bochrim demonstrated their deep love for the Rebbe. It's a very powerful story I heard of the Rebbe Rayatz in the year Tovshin Tes, the last Yom Kippur, B'chaim Chayusi Ba'al Medain. The last Yom Kippur was Yom Kippur Tovshin Yud, 1950. 1949. Yom Kippur, 1949. There were a few Bochim that learned right here in this Zal, in this room that we are in. And one of the Bochim got engaged. He was an American boy. He got engaged to a girl from a chashuva, a very distinguished family in Borough Park. So they had what was called a vort then, like a l'chaim. This young man came from a family from the Midwest. His father was a farmer. And he came to the l'chaim, to the vort, dressed in his work clothes. He had dirt under his fingernails. Now the woman, the Kala, came from a very distinguished family. Her grandfather was named Haraf Pardes. He was a very choshev Rov in Borough Park. And he gave one look at the father of the chos and he said, no. He called in his children and said, this shidduch is not for us. And they broke it right there. This bocher came back to 770, broken-hearted. And I heard the story from Rabbi Chitrik, who knew this bocher. That's the first half of the story. 15 years later, Rabbi Chitrik tells me, he would have a shir in his house. Rabbi Mentlik, who was the Rosh Yeshiva again in this room. I remember Rabbi Mentlik giving shiurim, the Rosh Yeshiva of Temchet Mimim. Rabbi Mentlik gave a shir once a week, and after the shir, he would tell a story. And he told a story, an interesting story. He says, Yom Kippur Tovshin Yud, Yom Kippur 1949, right before Kol Nidre. The Frierdiker Rebbe was upstairs in the second floor of 770 in his apartment, wearing a kittel and a talus, and he was sitting already in his chair, in his wheelchair. And he summons Rabbi Mentlik. He says, come upstairs. He comes upstairs. Rabbi Mentlik, when he told the story, he would like a shiver. He said, "The Rebbe is gesehen wie ein Malach Hashem tzvokes," like an angel, right before Yom Kippur. And he tells me, Frierdiker Rebbe telling Rabbi Mentlik, right after Yom Kippur, I want you to go to Borough Park, my shliach, and go to a home called Rav Pardes, and tell Rav Pardes the following words: "A der and der bocher, this and this bocher, this and this student is meiner a kind. He's my son." Rabbi Mentlik had no idea what, when, but that's what he did. Right after Yom Kippur ended, I don't know if he went before the meal, after the meal, he ends up in Borough Park. He goes into Rav Pardes, they're already sitting by this Sudas Yom Tov, Mitzvah Yom Kippur. Strange. He says, I have a mission, a shlichus from the Frierdiker Rebbe. It's called the Fried from the Rebbe. Rav Pardes was not a Chabadnik, but he had great respect for the Rebbe. They sit down privately, and he says, the Rebbe told me to tell you that this and this student is Zainer a kind, the Rebbe's a kind, he's the Rebbe's kid, the Rebbe's son. And he said it a second time. The Rebbe hat mir gesagt, he told me to tell you it's a Meiner a kind. Rav Pardes heard that. He immediately said, mit azam mechuten will sich nicht dingen. With such a mechuten, I'm not going to argue. And the shidduch was reinstated. It was about that boy. Rav Pardes, his grandchild, he broke the shidduch, it went back. Erev Yom Kippur, right before Kol Nidre. What's lying in the Rebbe's mind? A bocher, an American boy, that his heart was broken because the shidduch was broken. And the Rebbe, like a father to a son, it's a minor kind, it's not just words, my child. So this isn't just an idea in the Maimed. The Rebbe is telling us this is the love that a Rebbe has to a child, the love that Eibishter has to his children. So now from the Moshel, let's now go to the Nimshel. Now he's going to explain this essential love, core love that God has to the Jewish people, does now not allow for any grievances, for any accusations, for any mekatregim. It just does not tolerate it. And that's going to give us the power to overcome every concealment. Because God is not affected by concealment. We too have the power to overcome and see the gili for which the helam is b'shvil hagili, as we've been learning in the beginning of the Maimar. So let's continue. So he says like this. The example we just learned about core unconditional love doesn't want to hear anything negative. And this is not conditional. This nothing can shake this deep love. He says the example for this, Lamaila, Ba'avas HaKadosh Baruch Hu Knesset Yisrael, that the love of Hashem, of God, to Knesset Yisrael, to the Jewish community, Sheyesh B'zeh Beis Madreges. And he's going to explain the two levels of love that he described in the relationship of God with the Jewish people. Ha'alef ha'ava shal pi hatam is the love that is based on reason. Remember, the first level was based on reason. What's the reason by the Eibishter? Hainu mitzad halos man shalahem. Just like we learned before, the love came because he's a good person or because he did you a favor. L'mayla, there's also kavyochel similar, that God has love to the people for a reason. Why? Because the Jewish people halos mayan nukfin. Basically, in the Chassidish language, asarusa de latata, it means elevating, that we take initiative through our Aveda. Literally, Mayim Nukfim means the feminine waters. It means that Aveda Momata Lamayla, that we initiate from below, B'kiyam HaTeirah Mitzvahs, in our performance of Teirah and Mitzvahs, U'ba'Aveda Shebelev. And again, when you say Kiyam Teirah Mitzvahs, Aveda Shebelev, sounds like Teirah Aveda Milas Chasodim, basically. Teirah Mitzvahs is Teirah Milas Chasodim, and Aveda Shebelev is Aveda, the service of the heart. So when the Eibishter sees that we are taking initiative, reaching to him through davening, through learning, through mitzvahs, so it has an impact on him. Kavyochel. That what? Kamayim aponim leponim. That like a face reflected in the water, kain leva odam la odam, the heart is reflected. So the effects, the Eibishter me'erim al yidei zeh avos Hashem eleim. When you show love to God, he shows love to you. But that's based on a reason. You did something, so it's a cause and effect. Action, reaction. Asusa de latata, asusa de la'ela. You take initiative, you show love to someone, even on a human level, he responds. Same thing the Eibishter. Shagam mipnei avazu. Now he says, even this ava, though it's mipnei hatam, is due to a reason. In other words, kavyochel, if you didn't do aveda, you wouldn't have this level of ava. We're not talking about the deeper level of ava. We'll get to that shortly. But even this ava, remember we said even the ava mitzad hatam also doesn't want to hear negative about the person you love. However, it's not completely unwavering and unconditional. So he says, meaning even a reason, an ava that's based on a cause and a reason, God does not want to listen on an accuser and a prosecuting angel or a prosecutor on Israel, on the Jewish people. That's level one of Ava. The Habayis is a deeper level. This is now a core love. This is not because we do Aveda Allah Asman and we do Teirah Mitzvahs and Aveda Shebelev. There's now a core connection between the Shomis and the Eibishter. Like the Chazal say, Yisrael Olav Machshava. And when you learn Tanya Pedig Beis, the whole foundation there. Chelik Elikal Mamash, like Moyach Ha'av. Bonim Atem L'Hashem Alekechem, like a Ben and Ha'av. This is not due because the son is a good boy or a good person or doing something good. The core, the essential connection is the cause for the love. Yisrael Olav Machshava, Pirush, Upirish, Olav Machshava, Hainu B'chinis Pnimis Ve'atzmis Ein Sei Baruch Hu. What does it mean Yisrael arose in God's thought? It means in the innermost dimension. It's like a child that a father is envisioning. So in his inner and core Ein Sof Baruch Hu is where Neshamas Yisrael are rooted. You are sons to God. Bonim. It's a word, bonim. Ben, like a son. He comes from the core Me'ach Ha'av. This is Tanya Pedig Beis. A son comes from the very core mind of the father. Since we say neshamas are bonim la'Hashem Elokeichem, like a ben, a physical son, comes from the core essence of his father's mind, the neshama comes from the core essence of the divine, of Atzmus Ein Sof. So now this level of Ava is a whole other dimension. The mishum zeh einem reitzim l'mayla klal l'shmoya. And because the mishum zeh einem reitzim l'mayla klal l'shmoya is divrei hamakatrig al Yisrael. Okay, I'll say it again. The mishum zeh, because of this Ava Atzmis, this core love, einem reitzim l'mayla klal l'shmoya el divrei hamakatrig al Yisrael. They don't want to hear above at all to the words of a makatrik, to the words of a prosecutor, to the words of an accuser. that's accusing Israel, the Jews, of anything. U'kamei shekosov, like it says in the Pasuk in Balak, Lahi bedoven biyakev v'leira omel b'Yisrael. He does not see any evil in Yaakov and does not see any perversity in Yisrael. Even Bilam said that. Hainu shalamayla enim reitzim ve'enim mechelim. Again, lamayla, they don't want and they are not capable. Not just they don't want, they're not capable. Lahabit, I'm sorry. Ve'enim mechelim lahabit ulires ala leitev. They don't want and they're not capable of gazing and seeing lahibit the lashon and seeing on the not good oira or the evil she'esim Yisrael. In other words, even if it's happening, they don't want and are not capable of seeing it. Why is the lashon they? Till now he's talking about the Eibishter. So it could be he's talking about all the keiches elyenim, the malachim, everything that's lamayla. He's using plural right now. U'kamei shekosov Yar oven v'lo yizbeinen. That he saw evil v'lo yizbeinen, they didn't pay attention to it. V'omer Razal, listen to this Razal. Ben kach v'ben kach bonayim. Whether they behave this way or they behave in a not appropriate way, they're my children. These are my children. Makes no difference how they behave. They're fundamentally and at the core connected to me. Ula'achlifim b'uma acheres yefsher. And to replace them with another nation is not possible. It's not even a consideration. These are my child. This is my child. I'm not going to find another child. He says, the kol zeh hu mipnei ha'ava atzmis d'HaKadosh Baruch Hu l'neshamas Yisrael. All this is due to the core and deepest love of atzmis d'HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Eibishter, to the souls of Israel, neshamas Yisrael. Now he goes the other way. Remember, kamayim upon leponim. Before we were talking in the first level of Ava that it's initiated through the halos man avedas adam lamata, and that causes God to love us. Now we're talking about a core love that begins with Eibishter to his child, neshamas. So he says, "V'cheinu ba'avas neshamas Yisrael HaKadosh Baruch Hu." Same thing with the love of the souls of Israel. So the Eibishter to Hashem, she atzmis. It's a core connection. It's a core love. B'mesiras nefesh b'peil mamish. In other words, it's not just convenient. Mesiras nefesh b'peil mamish, total dedication and commitment. Chassidus Taichus mesiras nefesh means mesiras haratzon, complete commitment. B'peil mamish, in actuality, which of course includes mesiras nefesh at times, which is not of the positive sort, one that you give your life for God. B'derech l'mayla ma'ateva, in a way that's higher than nature. Reminds us of what he said at the end of chapter 1. L'mayla m'derech ha'teva, remember? Shem Havaya. So it's not just a natural love due to a reason. Kamei shekosov, like it says, Kelecha hiragnu kol hayom. Which means we are all the time completely dedicated, ready to die for you. Ready to be killed for you. The kol zeh mepnei ha'ava atzmis hanatua v'kvua b'kol echad ve'echad miYisrael. And all this is due to the core love that is implanted, embedded, permanently, kvua, within each Jew. So it's not a dover nesif, it's not an additional thing, it's not just a faculty, it's part and parcel. The essence of a Jew is one with loving the Eibishter in this way. Ava atzmis, just as Ava atzmis from the father to the son, from the son to the father. V'hainu, this means that Ava atzmis shal HaKadosh Baruch Hu l'neshamas Yisrael keiremes ha'ava atzmis l'neshamas Yisrael HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They explain this core love of Hashem, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to the souls of Israel, to the neshama, causes the core love from the neshama to the Eibishter. Bedugmas dover ka'ava atzmis da'avu ben. Like, for example, like we said, the core love of a father and a son. Okay. And now we come to the punchline, to the end, and the highest point of the Maimer. But the Frierdiker Rebbe ties it all together to answer and explain the Alter Rebbe's taich al shleisha dvorim ha-helam emet. Remember, helam is concealment. It includes the mekatrigim. Now we've established that helam is b'shvil hagili. The only problem is, will we see it through? Will we see that the darkness is not really darkness, it's only a step toward light, or it's only a prelude to light? The Eibishter sees it that way, that's why he doesn't accept any halamas. There's nothing you can say to God regarding Ava Atzmis that will impact him about a Jew. This is his child, period, unconditional. That in turn causes Aid to have an Ava Atzmis to the Eibishter. And this is the koyach that gives us to see through the helam. That's how he's going to now conclude. But there's some extremely powerful lines here. So let's read this carefully. It says like this. V'ha'ava ha'atzmis, and this core love, the atzmus ein sev baruch hu, of atzmus ein sev baruch hu, the core of ein sev baruch hu, of the infinite, may he be blessed. He hanesenes eiz v'keach l'neshamis Yisrael. This core love gives the power and the strength to the neshamis. Ba'avedas havaya, b'teira aveda v'gemilas chasadim. In the Aveda of the three Amudim, of Teira, Aveda Tefillah, and Gemilas Chasodim, kindness. Asher al yedei zeh mesirim es hahelem u'mizgala ha'er p'apnimi. Through this Aveda and Teira Aveda Gemilas Chasodim, we remove the helem. Remember, the helem is b'shvil hagilui. So, al shleisha dvarim hahelem emet. Why? Because to reveal the real purpose of the helem is through this and what gives us the power to see through the helem and not be distracted by it or in any way deceived by it? That's through our commitment and our total love that pushes us to continue with our Teira Vedic Milos Chasodim, which reveals the Kavonas HaHelem, which is Gili. What's the Er Pnimi? Remember, the intention of the concealment, like with the teacher, or with a father hiding from his son, or the teacher concealing the idea in Mishalim and examples, is not to conceal, it's to reveal a deeper dimension. And it's up to the child or the student to see through it. Now, listen to this. This is the last words that the Frierdiker Rebbe is saying in this Maimer, Chanukas Habayis. This is not just Aveda, it's a cheva. It's a responsibility. And he brings a Mishnah, very famous Mishnah. The Mishnah Sanhedrin says, the Rebbe Tzeichen is below, that a person is responsible to say that the person is responsible to say that the entire world was created because of me. Which means I have responsibility for the world. Taich is the Frierdiker Rebbe, based on the Alter Rebbe's Taich. Chayev kol adam lemer b'shvilei nivra elam b'shvilei nivra hahelam. Every person is responsible to say the concealment was created because of you. You understand the depth of this? That this concealment, which seems so dark, was created because of you, that you, asher hu ba'avedosi yosirese, you were given concealment with a mission to be able to remove the concealment and reveal that it's b'shvil hagilui. So b'shvili nivra elam is tied to b'shvili nivra hahelam. So when you see concealment in any form or fashion, your personal life, with your children, in the general gullus, any situation, we're living in challenging times now. B'shvili nivra hahelam, because of you was created the concealment, in order because you have a vote of confidence that the Eibishter says, our deep love can never be shaken, and when you invoke that, you can overcome the concealment. So the concealment is created because of you, in order for you to remove it through your Aveda. And this is the end of the Maimer. And this is the meaning that on three things the world stands. What are we talking about? Ha'elam, ha'helam emet. Just like b'shvilei nivra helam, for you was created the concealment. The whole concealment is standing and waiting for one thing. for you to do Teira Vedic Milas Chasodim. Dal Yedei Aveda B'Teira Vedic Milas Chasodim. Through your work, your commitment in learning Teira, your commitment to Avedis Atfilah, and Gemilas Chasodim, your kindness and acts of kindness, Meisir HaHelem V'Yizgala Eir HaPnimi, removes the concealment and reveals the inner light that is not obvious to the naked eye, but is waiting for you to release it. And with this, the Frierdiker Rebbe concludes the Maimer, the Chanukas Habayis Maimer of 80 years ago. The personal lesson is very obvious. First of all, for the times then, the difficult times, the Helem V'Hester of that period, 1940, is impossible to describe. Frierdiker Rebbe, imagine the keiches it had to take, seeing the tzoros, and yet saying at the end of the day, there's a gili here somewhere. We may not understand it, we may not know it, but there's a gili. And there's no such thing as a Helem that's on its own. And the Helem is waiting for Teira Vedic Milas Chasodim to release the gili from within it. And it's a chiyuv. Aveda Zuyah Chiyuv's Kol Adam. So imagine the Frierdiker Rebbe sitting there, right here in this room, saying a Maimer, the opening of 770. 770 that we all have come to know and love. A 770 that would impact millions of people till this very day. Driven by one statement that we have a chayv, a responsibility to look at the concealment everywhere in our lives, in the world around us, in order to remove that Helem. So most of the time when people have a Helem, they have a darkness, they have a tragedy, God forbid, or a loss, or some setback. Most people, they lick their wounds, they retreat, and well, okay, what can I do? At best, they say, I have betochen, it's going to get better. Here goes a completely different approach. The best defense is offense. We're not retreating. You see a Helem, take the bull by the horns and recognize that it was given to you. B'shvile nivra Helem. You were given this concealment to do something with it, to overcome it. Every negative has a deeper reason for it. And you see this central theme. I can tell you from my own experience. The thousands of letters that Rebbe wrote, the sichas, the maimorim, the answers, yechidus. Never ever did the Rebbe ever resign himself and say, okay, this is too difficult. He gave the Rebbe a challenge, a situation. There's a deeper reason. There's always a deeper reason. My father, Olav Shalom, had a lot of kiruvim from the Rebbe, Gershon Jacobson. In the year Tafshin Nun, he was ill and he ended up being in the hospital for Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur that year. Tafshin Nun. We're now in Tafshin Pei, we're talking 30 years ago. This is Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, 30 years ago. And the Rebbe, Erev Yom Kippur, those years he didn't give lekach, which is the sweet honey cake, to everybody, only to select few. I was summoned to get a piece of lekach the Rebbe wanted to give me for my father. So I stood in Gan Eden Atachten, just a few steps from here, and the Rebbe gave me lekach, 2 pieces of honey cake, and he said, "Das ist von Taten, sollst dem geben, geben, das ist von Taten, soll haben a süß und gesunde Jahr. You should have a sweet and healthy year." Then the Rebbe smiled and said to me, "Und sagen, as at verendig in sein Schliches dorten, that man von dort nach Eslosen, that when he'll finish his mission in the hospital, they'll release him." I went straight to the hospital. It was Erev Yom Kippur. I brought the cake, gave my father. I told him exactly what the Rebbe said. My father did his thing. He probably talked to doctors. He had it his way. The Rebbe said, a mission. Okay. Just to show you that this was not just a nice line, after Yom Kippur, the next day, Rabbi Chadakov, the Rebbe's chief of staff, whose office again is just a few feet from here, Rabbi Chadakov came to see my father. He was already ailing and aging. It wasn't easy for him to travel, but he came to see my father. And he says to my father, the Rebbe wants to know if you already finished your shlichus in the hospital. Now tell me, you think anybody goes to a hospital? I'm not talking about a mivtzoyim, on a campaign. You go to a hospital? Because my father was sick. He's not going for a sightseeing tour. He wasn't going to enjoy himself. He had no choice. The Rebbe doesn't see it that way. It's a helem, b'shvil hagilui. There has to be a shlichus there. One way or another, you're there for a reason. Hashem in his mysterious ways figured the only way to get you there is through a sickness and illness. But the Rebbe didn't see illness, he saw Gili. This is like a different way of looking at existence. That's why when anyone came to the Rebbe with a problem, whether it was a ailing child, or it was a shidduch issue, or it was parnasa, or building a moised and difficulties, there was never such a thing, oh, okay, I feel for you, let's cry together. Never. Every helam is b'shul Gili, and it's a chayv. You know, you think of it, this is the statement that a Rebbe is telling us. We have a chayv. Not just a chayv responsible to build Yiddishkeit in this world. A chayv, whenever we see concealment, your job is to create revelation, to give hope, to give encouragement, to give a kind word, exactly as the Rebbe taught us to do. So when you think of it this way, yes, 80 years have passed. It's a lifetime. But in many ways it hasn't passed, because the very walls, the very floor, every piece of furniture here, every table, is saturated through and through with the Mesiras Nefesh of the 6th Lubavitcher Rebbe and then the 7th Lubavitcher Rebbe. The Rebbe would always say 10 years about the Frierdiker Rebbe, that he did his Teira, Vedic, Milas Chasodim, answered questions, responded to the tears, as he told President Shazar, this I cannot bring to you. This is this building. It's not a building, it's a Migdash Ma'at of a Nossi B'Yisrael, of a Neshama Klolis. And that lives on more than ever. Yes, we have our challenges today. It's after Gimel Tammuz. We don't see Begashmis what was seen 80 years ago. We don't see Begashmis what was seen 70 years ago or 60 years ago. But Kedusha Le'Zazim Imkema. Our whole being here now is to honor and celebrate. No, some things do not die. The Ruchnius, the Neshama, the Mesiras Nefesh, the commitment lives on. It lives on in each one of us. We are the Rebbe's arms and legs. When we walk into 7-7, when we walk into the Zal, the other rooms, we are essentially reliving what the Rabbeim taught us to be like. And al shleisha dvarim ha'elam emet. Not just elam, helam. Even the concealment is waiting for us to reveal, waiting for us to do, to learn a Vorteira, a Tefillah, a Kapitel Tilim, a Tzedakah, a Gemilas Chesed. So when you do it, you're not just doing a nice thing. You're not just fulfilling a mitzvah. You're actually reversing that which keeps so many people trapped, a concealment that they don't know how to get out of. And that's what the Rabbeim gave us, a vision to never ever be deceived and buy into this deception, even the divine deception of the tzimtzum that conceals it all, because it's only for revelation. And it's coming from the deepest type of love, which that love can overcome all and overpower all, and give us the ability to truly take any situation we're in and reveal the deepest good. At the end of the day, that's what Chassidus says, the whole golus, for all its pains and all its travails and all its ups and downs, the kavanah of golus is geula, geula, geula. It's the same letters. You just have to add the aleph. You don't have the aleph, you don't have revelation. You add the aleph, the gilui is revealed in the geula, in the helam. So the helam becomes the building blocks of geula. We need this world, and we need everything about it. Even the concealment is a catalyst for that type of revelation. So we say l'chaim shmeinim shana, 80 years to the Rebbe Rayatz, who dedicated this building, and then to his son-in-law, the Rebbe, who continued in an even greater way, the Deir HaShvi, told us, V'shachanti b'seicham. And the Rebbe made it clear that this is Beis Rabbeinu Shebebavel. This is a house that is a Migdash Ma'at, and in many ways will take us to the Beis HaMikdash HaShlishi, Yerushalayim Ir HaKedesh. This should all happen, even before Rosh Hashanah. Should all have a ksiva v'chsima teva. I'm sure that Chof-Alef Elul led into a tremendous Rosh Hashanah. Frierdiker Rebbe actually wrote and said that Erev Rosh Hashanah he gave a bracha, which only continues this theme. He says, Yehi rotzen shetich l'shnas shana. He said, Yehi rotzen shetich l'shana v'klol yiseha. That there come to an end to a year and its curses. We know the curses of that year. V'tachil shana v'bircheseha. And a new year should begin and its blessings. As it will sein, Kisisa es Reish B'nai Yisrael. Kisisa, because Tavshin Aleph, after Tavshin was Tavshin Aleph. Kisisa, that the Reish B'nai Yisrael should be lifted up. So now, 80 years later, we go from Tavshin Pei to Tavshin Pei Aleph. Chassidim are saying, the Rosh Tevis, as the Rebbe said, in the year Tavshin Nun and Tavshin Nun Aleph, Teheshnas Nisim, Teheshnas Niflois, and then Teheshnas Niflois Ereno. From the Pasuk, Ki meit Tzeschem Eretz Mitzrayim, Areno Niflois, the Rebbe said, Teheshnas Niflois Ereno. So now, we don't have the Nun, we have the Pelois, Teheshnas Pelois, Pele, wonders, God's wonders, and then there's Teheshnas Pelois Areno, Tavshin Pei Aleph. It should be a year of Teheshnas Pfaratzta, which is the Gematria 770, and only go from there, as Mashiach told the Baal Shem Tov, when there'll be Yefutzu Meinesecha Chutza, Yefutzu Faratzta, then Osimar do Malke Mashiach, L'chaim, L'chaim, L'chaim L'vracha.